And we're live. Good evening, everybody. I'm Bob Weathers here from Your Vitality Project with my favorite guest here on Friday nights. Here we are with Angela MacLeod. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Bob. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be here with you for sure. Our topic tonight is how to identify your and our resilience skills. So we're talking about resilience and that there might be skills that we could engage with and build upon that could actually help us. And I'd love to just open up the floor to you, Angela, your own reflections. This is so much into areas of expertise for you, and a dialogue for a few minutes tonight.
Sounds good. Yeah. I just love the way you started off with how to identify your own resilient skills.
Yeah.
You know, so starting with an assumption that we already have some skills. We already have ways to tap into coping, to being more resilient, to dealing with stress, and starting from that place, I think, is a really smart way to go. And then, like with a lot of things in life, we can always build on that, and build and get more skills. Well, let's see. I've been really fascinated with this topic really for a long time.
Yeah.
And as you know, and one of the things that lately has been pretty interesting to me is the way that we can actually amplify our skills by combining several together. So say if I already know that breathing with awareness is useful to me, that it does help calm me. If I can also combine with that a memory that is really positive, like a memory of a person in my life who I consider to be an ally, somebody that I know loves me dearly, that I feel trust with, so I can amplify the power of the breathing work and the mindfulness by bringing in something that I resonate with emotionally, whether it's a memory or even something you imagine, because our imagination is really powerful.
Yeah.
So for me, actually, at first that was hard. I was doing some work where the idea was that you want to bring to mind a memory that was really positive, and to do this work, to combine it with some other tools. And I kept noticing how I'd come up with a memory in the past, but there would often be another combined in with the positive memory. There would be something negative, or something like, oh darn, I missed out, or I missed that person, or there would just be something mixed in. So I found that actually active imagination, or imagining a place or a situation, keeping it very simple, that it could be like my private place of sanctuary. And you could get very detailed with it, in terms of where it's located, what it looks like, if there's sound there, what kind of sounds. So combining a memory or something imaginary, it could even be a line of a poem that just really is resonant for you, or even one word. And sometimes the simpler the better. So maybe the word would be peace. So maybe focusing on mindfulness of the breath, and then bringing that word peace into it. And so you've got the body, you've got breathing, being present, you engage your mind, your frontal cortex. And then you could also include a kinesthetic element. So you could just bring your thumb and your index finger together and just squeeze. So it's like bringing together a number of elements that it's like you're stacking them together, and they amplify in power in terms of being present, of moving into a more relaxed place in your nervous system. Then the key of the key is to repeat it. Repetition, because what we know about our brains, and this is actually relatively new, that our brains are changeable, that we can change our patterns, we can change our brains. It's called neuroplasticity. And one of the key elements to making a change last is repetition. And so I know you know all of these things, but if you can kind of creatively bring together a number of elements, maybe it doesn't have to be all of these, maybe just two elements. And also just coming back to that idea that you could personalize it, make it be something that's meaningful to you. So what works for me may not work for you or another person, but the principles are very similar because of the way that our humanness, we have a lot of similarities in terms of how our brains work and our nervous systems. So that's what came up for me as I read the title, and I let my mind kind of roll with this a little bit. And I'll just share a favorite, very short phrase that I've been using when I feel harried, when I feel like I'm overwhelmed. Like one of my key stressors is there's always too much to do. I can't get everything done. It's stressful to me. And so a dear friend of mine, so there's one element, somebody that I really care about and I love and I trust. And he wasn't advising me. He just said this phrase. He said, "the pace of grace." And when he said that, it just had a little ring to it that I just perked up. And so there I had a phrase, and it connected with a friend that I have a good association with. And so for me, taking a deep breath, saying the pace of grace, and just lifting my body up. So for me, changing my posture kind of anchors it in a different way in my nervous system and my whole body. So that's my one little example. I have other ones too, but and they can change over time, and and it's great if you can find things that are so simple that you can do them anywhere. It's like I have some that aren't very simple that involve shaking, and it's like, well, I'm not going to do that while I'm driving. I'm probably not going to do that when I'm teaching a class, or something like that, or I'm at a social event. But it's fun to just have a number of them, that you can use in different situations.
I just love your energy tonight, as well as your creativity with this topic. You so capture and deepen the intention of the original post and the video that was attached to it, which is, what is it that we already know by heart? What is it that we already have in hand? And I couldn't have imagined where you've gone with this, which is so beautiful, which is, what would it be like to take those and, like you're suggesting, synthesize those, bring those together? I just really appreciate it. There's a story that came to mind early on, and you're familiar because I've shared it with you before, but it was over 10 years ago when I was in supervision with 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗏. She was equal parts my supervisor as well as mindfulness encourager in our work together. And I so appreciated Bonnie's spirit and her mind, just the combination of how she was able to bring her heart to complicated concepts like interpersonal neurobiology. She's quite expert and also speaks in a way. She told me that she was an English major in college, and it showed. She writes as somebody who is whose background is in poetry, and she's also just brilliant in terms of understanding the intricacies of neuroscience. At any rate, I was meeting with Bonnie in supervision, and I brought to her, I confessed it to her sheepishly, is that at that point I had been meditating using mindfulness practices and variations on that for about 30 years. And I said to her, Bonnie, I feel so lonely when I meditate. It's gotten clearer for me. Some of that was situational for me. I just left a marriage and was in a major time of transition. And there was some part of that had only ever been true, is that there was something about what for a lot of people is like a release from expectation, was for me associated with my own experiences in my life of loneliness or even abandonment. And so it was very much an approach avoidance conflict for me. I loved what was afforded through mindfulness, and I also hated it. So I brought this to Bonnie, and she said, Bob, have you ever considered, and really it's just what you've just been suggesting, Angela. She said, have you ever considered bringing people into the meditation that you love? They can be living or past. It doesn't really matter. And integrating them into your practice. And I don't know why I missed school the day that they taught me that'd be a great idea. But I began implementing it immediately. And within the first week, I remember coming back to her the next week and saying, you've just single-handedly redeemed my meditation practice, because I was becoming more and more erratic with it. And as you know, Angela, and we talk about this intimately between ourselves, it's become integral to my meditations now. I don't meditate ever without bringing in the people that I care most about, including you. You're very much in my meditation practice, where it's very embodied, it's very connected. I don't feel lonely. In fact, I feel there are many times as I'm meditating, as I'm especially moving into my gratitude practice, but I just have this beaming smile on my face, because I get to be with you. I get to be with people that I care about in my meditation. So it's the opposite of lonely for me. And I really credit Bonnie for that, pivot point in my own meditation. And so you're talking about lots of ways of bringing together different strands of ourselves. For me, it was combining mindfulness practice, which was well practiced for me, with people in my life that it was like a separate track. It doesn't need to be separate. And so other creative ways of combining, I know that you were talking about kinesthetic and bringing in movement. I was just speaking to somebody today about you in terms of a couple of people I was meeting with, nominally for supervision, and how it is that you model integrating psychological and spiritual dimensions of our lives with being deeply embodied in rhythm, as a dancer, as somebody who cares a lot. I told them all about you, and it's like, let's bring our strengths together and combine those. And that was really the intention of today's post was, why start with what you don't know? Why don't you start with what's in your front yard, and we can refine it, like what you're suggesting, by combining these things, and then we can get to introducing other skills that maybe are maybe coming in the side door or the back door or something like that. But I just love the spirit of what you're talking about. I remember in graduate school I was taking a course, and it was on spiritual development. What was the spiritual formation, and it was about the only course at the graduate school I went to that really included some appreciation for the monastic and mystical traditions of Christianity. I was going to a seminary, and there was very little focus on contemplative practice, and that was what I was really drawn to for years. Had this one course on spiritual formation, and the professor introduced us to the idea. In fact, one of the articles in the course was written by the Catholic theologian and spiritual director Henry Nouwen. He'd already been influential to me. And I never have forgotten the title of the article. He called it The Thought of the Heart. And the article was going into what you know by heart. And I've always appreciated that. It's like, what do you know by heart? Well, you know movement by heart. I know music and drumming by heart. We both know poetry that we love by heart. And so when it goes, why not start with what we know by heart and integrate that into our healing, into our recovery, and then we can add other things. So I'd like to start with what we know. As my therapist, Dawn, says, what we know coming through the front door. Let's start with that.
Yeah. Well, and that makes it much easier, too, to repeat, to make it a practice.
Yeah.
Because I already know that I love it. I already feel comfortable with it.
Yeah. There's this term that comes up in one of the therapists, or one of the theorists that's been very influential for me, 𝗬𝗏𝗂𝗏. He's the founder of what's called self-psychology. He was a psychoanalyst, and he talked about therapy that is experience near as opposed to experience distant. And that it's the responsibility of the therapist to align himself or herself with the language and the expressions of the client, not the reverse. And so to create an environment for healing or transformation that is experience near would be the aim. And we're basically applying that to our development here, talking about recovery, talking about developing resilience skills. Start with what's near to our experience. Why not do that? Leverage that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was just with a client today where we work with mindfulness and inquiry. And I often use the word attention, like put your attention here, or notice this over there. And he let me know that he didn't like the word attention. It was just subtly didn't resonate for him. So we explored what worked for him. And what he came up with is along the lines with what we're talking about is, what each of us has meaning to different words.
Yes.
it's important to pay attention to that. It might seem trivial, you know, just because the word attention is pretty widely used, you know, and it's pretty simple. But for him, it didn't fit what we were doing. And so we found a word that did fit. And for him, the word was intimacy. He didn't want to just bring his attention to something like it was sort of this mechanical thing to do. He wanted to be intimate with what was arising in his experience. And so that worked for him. And so I'm taking note of that because now I want to change my wording for him. There was another word too. He doesn't like the term, using the term exercise. You know, so if you do these exercises, you will, you'll become more skillful. So again, it's a pretty generic word that we use a lot, but he had connotations with it that didn't work for him for what we were doing. And so we found a different
good for you. You know that my wife Colleen is a therapist, and Colleen will write very detailed notes after every session. She's quite conscientious about this, and she's shared with me that she will write down intimacy as an rather than attention, whatever the client, she'll write down the client's language, which I think is brilliant, is that it really gets her attuned to these nuances, because you said it rightly. The word attention denotes something, but the connotation is what matters in therapy. Words, this is what attention means. You can look it up in a dictionary. But what it connotes to your client has all kinds of attachments. And the fact is that no language is neutral.
Right.
That every language, every word that we have has connotations. My own therapist over the years has some reaction to some terms. Here's a term. I can still remember the time. This is 20 years ago. I came to see my therapist, Dawn, and I brought this in. I said, I used somehow in the sense, I said, I got dysregulated today, something like that. And he just looked at me. He was just completely gobsmacked. He went, dysregulated. And I think his response to that term, which is a technical term that I was very at ease with, his response to it was, could you pick a more mechanistic term than that, Bob, about feeling upset? And so we've dealt with this over the years. Language that for me doesn't put me off, puts him off, but vice versa. There's language that he might use that I need a different language. And so we negotiate that with one another. I feel like that's one of the ways that we also take care of ourselves, with what touches and moves and grows our hearts versus what sets us back. I think people will say, I meant what I said, or I said what I meant. It's not quite so literal in relationships. There's all kinds of, feelings and histories and attachments to all of this that we need to be aware of. So I respect very much your I'm going to use the word intimacy. Your intimacy with this client's experience. That's beautiful. Almost an attention, but I'm not going to say attention.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I've come to appreciate that more and more. And what at first might have seemed like, well, why be so nitpicky? Like, why be so? I have some kind of thing about, I'm too particular. But in this particular case, it's really about the relationship. It was really the connection with that client that I cared to understand why that word bothered him. And in fact, it didn't matter to me why it bothered him. It's just that it didn't work for him. And then we exchanged this intimacy and care, that I cared enough to go to work with him on that and find a word that worked. And so it became, the nitpickiness around the word was the vehicle for a deeper resonance.
Beautiful. Yeah. I really like what you're saying. I just remembered it right now. It was minutes after you introduced this interaction with this client. I just saw a client yesterday when we came online. It's a client that I've worked with for a while and I know her well. I used the full, she uses a short version of her name. Like, people call me Bob, but my formal name was Robert. Well, I called her by the long name of her name. And and it was out of affection. It was one. I don't ever use the long name. I just some people call me Robert, and it's a term of endearment, you know. And I used it with her, and she stopped me, and she said, she stopped me in no uncertain terms, said, I would prefer for you not to use that. And she just said very quickly, she says, I've got a lot of trauma around that. And if you stop and think about it, a lot of people do around their formal names. When their parents were angry, they would use their full name, including their middle name. I don't know the story behind that. I didn't inquire, but I apologized. I know my intention was loving. But if it's not received that way, then that's what matters. It's the recipient's response. And so I immediately corrected that and responded to her. And at the very end of our session, I reminded her, almost as a postscript, I said, I do apologize again for what I said earlier, and I'll remember that. You can bet your bottom dollar I'll remember that. It's like I think that things like this matter. It's the fine details that matter. And maybe, Angela, as you're talking about this work with your client and my work with my client, maybe it's the intentionality behind it for you and me, is that we both care to pay attention to the details, that we don't dismiss it. We don't even have to analyze it. We just are responsive. I think that speaks volumes. Well, we're going to have to wind down in just a couple of minutes. So I want to ask you if you have any, maybe some final reflections or thoughts on this theme. I think we're talking about it right now, because I think connection is one of the ways that we build resilience, to be honest with you. You know?
Yeah, I think that might be one of the most important elements.
Me too.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, last thing I'll share is how, well, one of the delightful things for me about resourcing, and I've come to like that term a lot, like skill building or resourcing, getting more resources for coping with stress, is that sometimes things come from unexpected places. So I sometimes listen to some radio stations with, you know, good music. And recently I heard a song that was just really beautiful to me. It really moved me. And I found out that the title of the song was How Beauty Holds the Hand of Sorrow. How beauty holds the hand of sorrow. And it brought tears to my eyes. I don't know what the author meant by that. It was a Norwegian singer. I didn't even know what the lyrics were. But sometimes the title will be so potent for me. And for me, what the meaning was for that song, or for that title, was how even in a place of sorrow, when I can contact a resource, which might be beauty or grace, and I can bring them together so that beauty holds the hand of sorrow, that it just, I don't even want to try to put it into words. It just transforms, or something happens with that.
It's really,
but the idea that just by opening, sometimes you find resources in unexpected places, the title of a song. And I don't even know what she meant by that, but it meant a lot to me. And I've been returning to that when I've been in some dips of grief lately. I remember how beauty holds the hand of sorrow. It just feels very loving. And it's not to get rid of the sorrow. It's inviting it and holding it together. And so for me, that's one of the areas I am exploring with regard to resourcing, because sometimes sorrow and grief can be stressful. It can be overwhelming. And
beautiful, beautiful. I really like how you're talking about bringing together, like you say, resourcing different aspects or different dimensions of our experience, sadness and beauty, fear and grace. We could just go down, bring these things together and have them inform each other. It's really the essence of any kind of creative process, isn't it? Bringing two things together that we might not otherwise bring together, and then something new is created, and out of that can come relief. Out of that can come resilience. Yeah, it's beautiful. I really love what you brought tonight. I love the fact that when you and I come together, I never know exactly where it's going to go, but it's always so gratifying. It's always so rich and nourishing. So thank you. Thank you again, Angela. I really appreciate the depth of your thoughtfulness here, and you bringing your spirit and your wonderful imagination to bear on this topic. It's wonderful. We will continue to be exploring this over these next days and weeks, we'll be looking at how to move through what I'm going to be calling high-risk situations, that is, highly stressful situations where it really calls upon the very best resources that we can find from within. And I look forward to visiting this with you again even next week. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wish you a good evening. Okay. Wish everybody a good weekend. Thank you, dear one. Take good care. Bye-bye for now. Good night.